And now the final unfiltered session for the day, and that's focused on workplace culture, the East versus the West. Lots of stories and myths out there, some of them true, some of them not so much. The good, bad, and the ugly again. And to hear more about it, we have a panel of speakers who have worked in Europe, North America, and Asia. Heng Lee, Engineering Director at Xfers, a fintech infrastructure startup based in Singapore with teams based around the Asia Pacific region. Before Xfers, he was in San Francisco with Facebook. Gregor Hohpe advises CTOs and technology leaders in the transformation of both their organizations as well as their technology platforms. Gregor has served as Smart Nation Fellow to the Singapore government. Junxu is the Chief Product Officer and partner at Endowus. Prior to this, he was with Dropbox, Lyft, ByteDance, and the Singapore Economic Development Board. And moderating this session is Elaine Truong. Elaine is the first product technical program manager at Facebook Singapore. She relocated to Singapore in 2019 after various stints in Menlo Park and New York. People, keep those questions coming. Over to you, Elaine.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those introductions. So I hope you're all super excited like I am for this panel. We have a lot in store to share with you. So welcome everyone to the panel on engineering and workplace culture in Singapore versus the US. So we're super psyched to provide an unfiltered, honest perspective about our experiences here with you. So first of all, thank you so much to our speakers and everyone listening and choosing to spend your evening or morning with us here today. We have about 50 minutes or so total for the panel, with about 30 minutes to hear from our wonderful speakers and 20 minutes of Q&A from the audience. So if you have a question, please ask it in the webinar and upvote questions that you'd like to be answered. And there will be a team prioritizing and fielding questions for us in time for the Q&A. So I'll kick us off. So when we think about Singaporean work culture, we have to consider that Singapore's tech community is relatively nascent, but it's growing really quickly, as you've heard. It's also not just Singaporean culture, but Southeast Asian culture, because Singapore is the hub, and you'll likely work with people all over Asia, if not the world, like I do. So how I like to break down workplace culture is from micro to macro. So if you think about micro, it's starting with things like everyday engineering collaboration, like working cross-functionally, reviewing code, and execution. Then the next level includes bigger concepts like management styles, leadership, and performance reviews and things like that. And the next level beyond that, on a macro level, we'll also talk about how the larger tech culture at hand is evolving, like the concept of what's a tech lead or engineers who also influence product decisions and what the future of work in Singapore means in the long term. So we have a pretty good lineup of diverse folks here today with JX and Heng, who moved back to Singapore and work in local startups with headquarters here, and myself and Gregor, who moved here with multinational tech companies with global headquarters in the US, but regional APAC headquarters in Singapore. So with that being said, let's get started. So to our panelists, can you start by telling us what initially interested you in moving to Singapore and share some context about your company and your current role? And it would be super helpful to also share, what's the relative size of the Singapore office, what are the team dynamics and culture like here? JX, do you want to start us off?
Thanks, Elaine. Hi, guys. This is JX. I think that with regard to the question, so I was born and raised in Singapore, and I've always knew that I guess Singapore is, a place that I'll return to. So after working at the EDB, I actually left for the US, and I spent around maybe 3 to 5 years over there working at various, startups. Even when I was working in the US, the question always came up, and I guess that applies to every Singaporean overseas: do you stay or do you go back? I think to me, it has always been a short stint. And that's because I think that Asia is where, when we build products, and that's what I do every day, that cultural context is so helpful and so important. And I feel that in Asia is so unexplored, even within ASEAN itself. And that was why after my stint in the US, I decided to move to China. Even though I, barely spoke Chinese, for all the Singaporeans here, I got a C5 for, I think it was A-levels or something, which, is not something that I'm very proud of. But in China, that was what really opened my eyes. And I think China again reinforced my decision to move back to Singapore, because again, in China, there's so much cultural context and nuances when we build products, like from a first tier city to a 8th or a 10th tier city. It's so different. And I'm just like, wow, I can spend 365 days moving to a 5th tier city and try to build product there. Or I can move back to Singapore, where I've grown up all my life and I have all of these different cultural influences, whether it is my helper from the Philippines, my classmates from Indonesia in high school. And so I think that was what really motivated it. So switching gears very quickly, I work at Endowus. We're Singapore's first and only digital financial advisor, where you can invest your CPF, SRS, and cash. The team is about 36 people. More than half are in EPD, engineering, product, and design roles. And I lead the product and design team.
Awesome. Thanks, JX, for that intro. What about you, Heng?
All right. My name is Heng, and I'm a Singaporean born and raised. Grew up in Singapore, studied in Singapore, and then I moved to the US. Worked at Facebook for about 5 years with Messenger. And then now I'm back in Singapore. I plan to move back to Singapore in about 4 to 5 years. And like I told everybody that, oh yeah, I'm coming back in 4 years, 3 years, 2 years. And then finally 1 year came, and then planned to come back to Singapore. So I left Facebook, came back to Singapore. That was before Facebook had an engineering office. And really like, my mission back in Singapore, and really the place where I think I can make the most impact is to, how I can help improve the engineering ecosystem in Singapore. And a lot of the work that I try to help out with on my free time is really, around that. And when I'm back in Singapore, I'm not trying to, I think me and JX, we are in like very good like positions. We can be really critical about the Singapore ecosystem. Because we are Singaporeans, we know like the culture, we have the cultural advantages, and we see things that maybe people don't see so clearly. And so what I hope to provide is this perspective of, the more honest view, the more unfiltered view, and maybe the more unpopular opinion about, what engineering and workplace in Singapore is around. So right now, I after coming back to Singapore, I decided, okay, I don't want to work at a big company anymore. I want to work at a smaller company. So I want to work on the ground with, engineers that are, growing in Singapore, and how do they perform and stuff, right? So I joined e-scooter company for about less than a year, right? It's Beam. That was good. I learned tons of stuff. And then now I'm doing, at Beam, I was doing more IC work, and now moved over to Xfers, and I'm working on management stuff, management related work, and performance evaluation and everything around. Our engineering team at Xfers is around 40 people, and we have quite a sizable also EM team, which is about 5-6 people. And our team is regional. We have people in Taiwan, Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore. And so we use, we were mobile first before, we were remote first before COVID happened. So pretty much we were quite easy for us to transition over that part. Yeah. So that's a quick summary about me. Let's go to some more questions. Yeah. Thanks.
Awesome. Gregor, what about you? What was your journey like, and what's your current team like here?
So yeah, thanks for having me. I've been in Singapore for 3 years, and I moved there actually for the first time, so no prior ties. I spent a good decade in Silicon Valley and 5 years in Germany before then. So I've been a little bit of globetrotter and seen 3 different continents of work culture. What attracted me in the end was more the region, I would say. Right, I think Asia, specifically Southeast Asia, is very vibrant, fast-moving, still a little bit of pioneer culture, but far enough along to have the resources to actually move the needle, growing middle class in many countries. So many great things about the regions that motivated me. And then naturally, Singapore has the pivotal role as being sort of the regional hub, whether that's for the multinationals or just generally in terms of being easily connected, lifestyle, culture, diversity, Changi Airport before 2020, right? So a lot of things that made Singapore a natural fit for me. So I spent time here both on the engineering side with Govtech, as well as I'm now with AWS. It's called I'm an enterprise strategist. So that's a customer-facing role. So I help our customers on their cloud journey and their cloud transformation. So I've seen sort of 2 different flavors of engineering culture, if you wish, within Singapore as well.
Awesome. So moving forward, a common question that I hear from friends at large tech companies who are considering about moving to Singapore or this region is they're thinking about how will it impact their careers, since for some companies, the US is the headquarters, and they might be concerned about how being away from that and how being so far would affect them. So was that a point of consideration for you guys when you were thinking about moving here? And how did actually, in the end, moving to Singapore impact your career opportunities? Heng, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. I think a lot of considerations around like big tech companies around really how much they want to invest in Singapore, right? Like this is, like you said, like it's not going to be their main product here in Singapore, and we need that conviction from the big companies that say that, okay, we want to build this product, we want to grow this area, and I think a lot of the things that people need to have the kind of like they need to know that the company is willing to invest. And the good thing is that EDB is doing a great job, right? Like they are getting people to like come into Singapore and set up companies, and not just set up companies, but bring as much of their core product here. I think that part of it is important. For me, the moving to a startup is a whole different game, right? Like it's high risk, high reward, right? Like, I mean, the risk is high for sure, right? But the reward is not clear in Southeast Asia, because the value of ESOP is not clear in Southeast Asia. It's becoming more clear with Carousel, Grab, Shopee, having very much more success. But that is a risk that people, if they want to take that high risk, high reward, then they have to. We can chat more about that. Yeah.
Awesome. Jax, what do you think?
So with regards to the question as to how do we think about our careers and how might it impact our careers in large companies when we move, across, places, to Singapore, I think there are 2 ways I think about that. The most important question is, what do you mean when you think about it affecting your career, which leads to what do you want in your career? The 2 paths that I'm referring to is, one, if your goal is to start something, then actually moving cross country is not that bad of a thing, because you kind of like feel sort of you have the security of a large company, and it's a huge amount of security because benefits like insurance, especially if you have a wife and kids, is huge, right? Even simple perks like getting a cell phone plan, paying for your home Wi-Fi. I mean, if these are all of the things that as you move to a new country, I think these are really helpful in lightening the load. But the nice thing is that with that security, it sort of frees you to go explore and sink in and figure out, are there any opportunities that I can go into? And so I would say in the first pass, you're optimizing to build something on your own after that. And I think that that's a great move. The second path is to think about, okay, if I want to continue to be a director and a VP and possibly take a C-suite position in that company when I move back, then I would think that it helps to have that global perspective, especially if it's a global company. One of the greatest things that I found was that when I moved from Lyft to ByteDance, suddenly like my inbox was filled with every single person you can imagine from the Valley trying to figure out what's going on in China. Right? You have people from Facebook, from Google, you have recruiters, you have product managers. You're like, Jags, can you tell us like what's happening? How do you think about TikTok? Why is TikTok doing this or that? And I think that that's very valuable, because when you go back, then you're truly in a unique position. And I think that's the same for Singapore and ASEAN. If we believe that ASEAN in the next 5 to 10 years would achieve growth rates that are way beyond what we've seen in the current developed markets, then I would say moving with a big company to a different location is sort of something that you can bring back with you, because I'm assuming that eventually, being in headquarters is core. But that may change with COVID and all, right? In that, maybe C-suites are all distributed. And if this pace really accelerates, then that weakens further. So yeah, these two things.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. I think just to share in my experience, this was definitely something on my mind. And actually one of the main reasons why I wanted to move here around, having like a high risk, high reward opportunity, like Heng mentioned, and also building that global perspective, like JX mentioned too. And in my experience, it's definitely impacted my learning and career positively because it's a smaller pond here. And in areas at Facebook, I've had to step up as a leader because I have experience working in other tech offices, and it's a much less mature of a tech office here. So there's a lot of opportunity to pitch things, even simple things that you would think we'd have, like running tech talks or building diversity in tech initiatives. So I'm really glad that we can highlight that to our audience. So shifting gears a little bit here, you guys might have heard or read about this viral Medium post written by Steve Yege. He's a former Grab employee, and he talks about the differences in US and Singapore work culture, like meetings after meetings and cultural norms, like don't call out people in meetings and things like that. So did you experience something similar to that? And what was your experience like? And what are some things about Singaporean work culture that you wish you could change? JX, do you want to start here?
Sure. So I think the question is really interesting because workplace and engineering cultural norms are evolving so quickly in Singapore because engineering is and product and design is such a new field. So what I mean is that in the short span of 5 years when I left and when I came back, we sort of came from engineering as a back office kind of outsourced tech shop to engineering as the pinnacle of success. And you can see that everywhere, right? From NUS computer science courses, entry grades level to starting salaries, etc. And the point I'm trying to make here is that when everything is changing so quickly and we are still trying to figure out what is the workplace norm, it's so difficult to sort of assess and get a sense of like what we actually mean by what the big difference is. But I would say that the biggest, all that context aside, the biggest sort of thing in the Singaporean workplace culture can be summarized as that of empowerment. I feel that people here, and all of us included, sometimes take hierarchy a bit too seriously in Singapore workplace cultures. And when I say empowerment, I feel, how do we feel empowered, right? To break through that hierarchy, because it is about ideas, it is about thoughts, and how do we have opinions that we are firm on, but are loosely held, right? And so I think that, yeah, if I were to summarize that, it's empowerment.
Awesome. Heng, I know you have some thoughts here too, especially with working with your team of engineers, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the empowerment thing, I think about it a lot, and I take a slightly different stance. I want to disagree here a little bit because a lot of people come to the conclusion that we need psychological safety, and we need more psychological safety, and psychological safety is not enough. But as we practice that more often, we try to give a lot of psychological safety and promote that. But I feel like a lot of things is around willingness and also time. Like we're just so very used to having a lot of things to study for, a lot of things to work on, and they don't have time to innovate, think of new stuff, right? So people need to start carving out time for themselves, carving out time to think, and instead of let's as leaders, let's just provide them with psychological safety, and then let's see what happens, let's see the magic unfold, right? Like I think we also need to learn how to give them time to think and to go out of their box. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I love that. Carving out time to innovate. Cool. So on the other hand, if we kind of reverse this question, what's something that you've seen happen often in Singaporean work culture that companies in other cultures should adopt or consider as well. Gregor, you might have some thoughts here.
Sure. Yeah, and as I said, I agree with the other guys. Like Singapore particularly is pretty diverse. So I think these cultural questions are always a little bit tricky because the place you work with and the team you work with, I think, can have a bigger influence on your work culture than the country that you're in, right? We are all sort of, multinationals. I wanted to make one quick comment about the career though, because I am a director, so I can speak a little bit from a different level. And I would have to say that at the higher levels, being in a satellite can put a lid on your career opportunities. And not so much in terms of what you can do, because I totally agree. It's more hands-on, you can step up responsibility, but there's the HR side of your career, like your levels, your compensations, and all these things. And for example, I report into the US directly because in Southeast Asia, there wouldn't be a person that I could really report in anymore. So I sort of hit my ceiling. There's one vice president for APJ, right? So for the whole geography overall, but that is something to keep in mind, so that which level you are, and the higher you move, the more interesting it is to actually be near the headquarters. Bringing experience from the satellite is highly valued because people want to know what's going on, like JX said, but sticking in the satellite, ultimately you run out of runway. Coming back to your question though, so what can we learn? Actually, I know, let me answer the other question again, sorry. So I know Steve personally, right? Steve Jäger. He's actually a pretty nice guy, nicer than his blog post might make it seem, right? He likes to poke the box and be controversial. But I think as controversial as he is, he always hits the point a little bit. So one thing that I would like to be easier in Singapore is make decisions and move on. Right? It's like, look, let's grab a whiteboard, let's have a 90-minute discussion, everybody give their input and just like move. Right? That is harder to do in Asia than it is in the US. In Asia, there's a lot of nodding, a lot of smiling, and then everybody does what they did before anyway, as if the meeting never happened. So I think, and then there's another meeting, and then there's about 500 WhatsApp messages, and at some point, somehow, nobody knows exactly, but ultimately somehow the decision gets made, sort of without anybody noticing. Right? So this is sort of something I think we could improve here. Going the other way, I think what Singapore particularly has, what I enjoy, is the diversity. Now, Silicon Valley does pretty well there, but I think in the end we do a really good job to make sure everybody's opinion gets heard. It's very inclusive, right? And you can see how the two things come together, right? Because if you always see everybody and everybody is included, it's sometimes harder to come to a decision. But I think it's also a very nice way that way. So I have not seen this hierarchical thinking so much, quite honestly, where sort of the boss tells people what to do and everybody sort of says, aye, sir. I haven't seen that. I think we're more like going out of our way to make sure all voices are heard. And I like that. As I said, we need to be careful that that doesn't hinder the day will come where like, okay, guys, what is it going to be? Which way are we going to go? So I think finding the balance there is really good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's, what you mentioned around balance is really important. So for example, one perspective on your opinion on whiteboarding and making quick decisions, I think that's actually something that we can also adopt in other work environments in the US and others, and learn from Singapore too, where the emphasis on more intentional, thoughtful decision-making is more prevalent here rather than moving fast like we've experienced in the US and having more aggressive goals, whiteboarding something really quickly. But that's something that I've experienced where it's more intentional with decision making. We're researching a lot of options. We're getting a lot of feedback from others. And even though that will add to the overall decision time and lots of meetings, pre-meetings and things like that, I think overall in some aspects it can result in a comprehensive decision. So there's a lot of different angles to these here, but like you said, it's all about balancing the two perspectives. So in terms of getting things done and technical execution, did you guys notice any differences in how you ship code, how you work with others, or how you've had to change how you make technical decisions on a day-to-day basis? Heng, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think people generally make fairly good reasonable decisions from a technical point of view. But I think when it comes to problems like sharing what they've done with their work and Q&A and stuff like that, and the promotion of their own work, I think that's where we don't have that skill right now. I think people are just like Gregor mentioned, right? We are really always prioritizing harmony over collaborative debate, right? And I think it's where we need to kind of grow in terms of like having more professional communication and being able to commit to certain decisions and say, okay, let's all follow this vision, instead of let's hear about all the points in the room and let's defer the decisions until later, right? But generally, I feel like people make technical decisions fairly well, and they are also very good implementers. Like I think people are just extremely good at getting things done, right? Like okay, once we have it in the backlog, in the product owner, or like the Scrum process kicks in, and everything is just going to roll like clockwork. So most of this is good. Most of the problems that we have is people not questioning the status quo, like working in the legacy code base. Like people don't ask questions like, why is this like that in the first place? Like, how come it's not as simple as I think it is, right? People just tend to build complexity on top of complexity. And so you end up having a lot of accidental complexity. And that's a lot of the things that we happen when we generally become like a bit too nice and I would say not professional enough, but we can always improve in that direction much more, given help from folks that are coming into Singapore. Yeah.
Cool. And JX, what do you think about this as you have PM experience and PMs are enabling engineers to execute technically? Were there any similarities or differences that you've seen?
Yeah, I think that the biggest difference, one of the biggest differences actually, being here and in a more established place like the Valley, is the support structures around engineering teams. I think Elaine, like you and I, for example, as a PM or as a TPM, in an established sort of organization, there are a lot of support functions, there are a lot of glue that happens that makes us all very effective, right? There's a PM, a TPM, there's a designer or a design manager, and then usually there's a data scientist or a product analyst, and it comes in a whole suite. And the ratio is always somewhat between 5 to 8 engineers, and then one of the other functions. And so I think what's really interesting is that because the support functions, it's always a luxury that we enjoy. But in Singapore, when that is new, one, and when two, companies don't have that luxury because they're still fighting to survive. What happens is that there's a huge gap in knowledge about the value of what these support functions can bring. Or are they even support functions or core functions? So I would say that a big difference is sometimes, even when you talk about being a product manager, like what does that exactly mean, right? We have debates about it all the time, even in China and the Valley. Are you a project manager? Are you driving product? Are you on the business side? Are you on the technical side? And the truth is that it's amorphous because it depends on your organization and your product. But I think that at least in China or in the US, there is a knowledge about that and how to work together. Whereas in Singapore, sometimes you sort of have to justify what you're doing and then help educate and bring people along that process to see and recognize the importance of these roles.
Absolutely. And on our side at Facebook, we're also just starting to have full cross-functional roles here, co-located in the Singapore office. So hopefully as the office matures, it will also empower the engineering teams to move faster and to make decisions within the region too. So I think that was a really good discussion on engineering execution. So moving forward, when we think about differences in management style or performance reviews, or we talked a bit about hierarchy previously. So could you guys expand a bit more on that? Were there any kind of like similarities or differences between the two regions? Gregor, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. And I have to warn a little bit. So in Singapore, I've been as individual contributor by choice, but I do see some of the differences. My main comment would be that I don't think Singapore is sort of the odd one out. I think it's actually the inverse. It's like the US is the odd one out, because having worked in Europe as well. So if you think about it, our HR processes are becoming very much Americanized, right? And I mean this in sort of a value-free way. So when I was a young engineer in Germany, being asked to self-evaluate would have been a very, very uncomfortable and very strange request. It's like, how can I self-evaluate myself, right? Like either I would give myself an A and be done easily, but then that would be kind of cheating. So I just wouldn't know what to do. So I think the US HR culture of this peer reviews and self-evaluation, I think has a lot of merit, but I think we acknowledge that really that is the odd one out. I think the rest of the planet is just sort of getting the hang of it and becoming more comfortable with it. I do see, and JX alluded to this, that even to this day, I am not as good as some of my US-based peers at describing my own contributions in a very positive light. Right? Because culturally, I've been raised that's like bragging, basically, right? That's putting yourself on a pedestal above your peers. That is not a good trait, right? That's being immodest. And in Europe, that is very much so, and I think across Asia, that is also very much so. So when I was in Silicon Valley, actually, as a software engineer, somebody made a website for Europeans how to work the system, like how to get adjusted to the self-evaluation, very North American system. It got taken down ultimately for cultural sensitivity. It was shut down, but that shows you how big the difference is, right? And I think it's all good for us to learn a little bit. It's good to translate your accomplishments into the bigger picture and the impact that you're making. That is healthy. But I can also see that it's uncomfortable for many people, and even for me to this day and age it is. But it's not a Singaporean thing. That is basically a rest of world thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that. There's this really interesting book that I read called The Culture Map by Aaron Meyer, and they talk about exactly what you went through, where in some Asian cultures, there's a lot of reading in between the lines. There's a lot of differences in how they give positive versus negative feedback and more implicit information rather than what we're used to in the US and Europe. Anyways, Heng Hong, what about you? Did you have any thoughts on engineering management and differences in the style here?
Yeah, I think engineering management is still a pretty new concept in Singapore. Well, I mean, before I came back, I mean, when I moved to the US, it was a new concept to me, right? And I learned to work with my manager for my success, right? And when I moved back to Singapore, I was assuming, because I've left for about 5 years, like I didn't know what's going on with engineering management or management in general in Singapore. So I decided to go around talking with a whole bunch of people, engineering leaders from different companies like Carousel, Govtech and stuff like that. And I felt that a lot of people actually had a very good idea of what engineering management is. And they read all the books. Basically, they tried all the practices. But like Gregor said, it's not going to just fit the American model, just slam it right in, right? And at the same time, we also cannot take the China model or Chinese model of how they run things and then like slam that right into our system as well. It's going to be a middle ground between some little bit of democracy and a little bit of authoritative kind of model, and then there's going to be some hybrid somewhere. And I think the best way for us to get there is really to get people to come together and talk about it, role play a bit, do some scenario-based learning on how actually to do management well in Southeast Asia. And I think we've not done that yet, and I think we can definitely do more of that. And I think I want to also help out in organizing some of these activities to get people to engineering management to come together and chat about stuff. Yeah,
that's awesome. So this year, especially in 2020, remote work is a really big thing that we've all gotten used to, even though Singapore is already opening up already at this time. And there was a recent survey about Google employees where they saw that engineers' productivity actually went down during this pandemic time, as you can expect. So, as we're moving towards this remote collaboration, remote hiring, onboarding, how would you say the engineering culture at your company has had to evolve and adjust there? Heng, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, I think a lot of the culture based in Singapore, the culture is really a lot of like high touch and, you know, very like friendship based, also like Steve Yeager's like blog post talking about, right? You need to basically get everybody to agree before they actually officially agree. And all these communication is going to make made worse by COVID. And I wouldn't say that it has helped for sure. I think a lot of the ways of running a remote meeting is not good for Southeast Asia. People can just turn off their camera, and people default don't turn on their camera, and people can just mute and do other things and zone out for a bit, right? I think it's definitely harder to get everybody connected, and I think that's important in making decisions and moving fast. Yeah, so I think that definitely affected us, and we need a lot more, you know, fun activities, onboarding, playing games online together, and a lot of conscious effort in that to make sure that, you know, everybody is still very aligned to the mission and understands the mission and how their work actually can contribute to the overall mission and objectives. Yeah,
absolutely. And building trust virtually is even more important during these times, and building those relationships, like you said, to make those decisions, to onboard new hires. Gregor, do you have any additional thoughts to add here around remote collaboration?
Yeah, and I did read the article, and the comment on the productivity was mostly around the junior folks not being able to get the sufficient mentoring and going up the learning curve. And interestingly, I think that is actually a little bit related to the previous question again, right? When we talk about management and leadership, I think in Asia, it's still a little bit sort of management is management and technical is technical. It's improving quickly, like the other folks said. But you know, what I took away from Silicon Valley, sort of the tech lead manager, the technical lead, like I was a TLM, right? Very hands-on, but still managing a team. They reported to me, but I was designing circuit boards, I was coding, right? It's like, I think that role we are very weak on, right, in Southeast Asia, because those are the folks who bring 10 years of hands-on experience. You cannot make them overnight. I know we're successful re-importing them, but there's a limit to that. You can do that. So I think that was the comment in the article, but it's been a challenge in Southeast Asia pre-COVID even. Now, my personal experience, I joined AWS in the beginning of March, and due to unfortunate family circumstances, I had to go to Europe very quickly, and I couldn't come back easily. So at the time, it wasn't that open. I was stuck in Europe for many months. So I've been almost entirely virtual. Like, I've seen the office enough to pick up my laptop and get a HR training one day and shake two people's hands or something. So yeah, being a major technology company cloud provider, of course, we've done fairly well, right? Everything is online video, collaboration. What I think has helped us is we are very document focused. Like, people probably know the stories of the PR FAQ, the famous Amazon press release document. And the stories are all true, right? We really sit down at the beginning of a meeting and read a document that's been prepared, that's been thought through. And some of these mechanisms scale extremely well for an online forum, right? Because you have a basis that you're discussing on, you can do this in a distributed way, and then you have a focused discussion. So that's worked in our favor. And of course, our tech infrastructure has helped. The part that is more difficult is you can easily have more blind spots, like the unknown unknowns, right? You don't have the water cooler, the hallway conversations where you randomly run into somebody or walk into somebody's desk. It's like, oh, what are you working on? This looks really interesting. That one goes away, unfortunately. So I encourage everybody to make a very conscious effort to still sort of reach out to people, ask other people for folks you should connect to, because otherwise your universe runs the risk of being much smaller than it would have been with a physical setup. So that's to be careful about.
Absolutely. And as we continue forward in remote collaboration, remote work, and building these relationships, networking virtually, if we want to think long-term about how this is evolving, what's most exciting about the future, what would you guys say we can expect in the next few years around how engineering culture is changing? Gregor, you mentioned a bit about the tech leads and tech lead managers, and how that concept is relatively new here. Do you have any further thoughts on whether that'll be like a pattern or something that will be introduced?
Yeah, and I have a pretty clear view there. I think like software engineers are going to rule the world, right? I mean, it's very simple. If you can produce stuff, I mean, let's think about it, right? The tech infrastructure that we have built allows software engineers to be so productive. So I started with a home computer where it couldn't even store the stuff that you had written. It had to go on a tape or you put it on a piece of paper, right? Like now you can build something in scale to 100 million users overnight. Everything is in the cloud stored. So the platform that we've given software engineers is amazing, right? And old folks like me who can think like 20 years back, we can really see how big the difference is. Right? You open a Cloud Shell, you start coding, you run this thing, you deploy, right? In the old days, it was like 2 months until your computer arrived and you could do anything. So that's what makes software engineers king, I would say, right? We rule the world because we can build things that give value to other people, that improves people's lives. And I think that's not going to go away anytime soon. There's always naysayer of like low code and all this will be automatic. I'm like, no, right? There's so much innovation, so much stuff going forward. As a software engineer, you'll have a fantastic role. Now, the remote thing is a little bit interesting because that's where two opposing forces in my mind come together. As one thing, of course, as a software engineer, I'm the perfect remote worker, right? It's like I'm sitting in front of the screen anyway. So whether that screen is connected to 10,000 miles away or to my living room doesn't really make a big difference, right? So that's good. What is more difficult is when we look sort of geopolitically, right? So, and 2020 has probably reinforced that. There is more nationalistic trends. It's more difficult to get work visas. There's also sometimes changing sentiments in some countries regarding foreigners. So while you could be completely virtual, the mechanics of it have become a little bit more difficult, right? And me sort of being a foreigner, having worked around Southeast Asia a little bit, I can totally see that there's a lot of struggles in terms of getting the proper residence permit, the work permits being accepted, and again, Singapore being one of the easier ones. But I see these two things unfortunately working slightly against each other. So let's hope the geopolitical stuff eases off a little bit, and then I think being a software engineer and also a virtual software engineer is a great career to have.
Yeah, definitely. So we're coming up on time before we move on to Q&A. So we have one more question left before we take questions from the audience. So please start thinking of questions that you'd like to ask the panel. So the last question is, what's some final wisdom that you'd like to share with participants on the call today? So what's something that you wish you knew when you're in their shoes? Heng, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think we have a quite interesting stand around, like we have quite an interesting perspective because like I kind of represent the group of folks that are not exactly VP level or C-suite level, right? We've been in the US for maybe 4 or 5 years. We are graduating as senior engineer, software engineer, or like maybe staff engineer, right? Like these are the bands that we represent, and coming back to Singapore, where are our opportunities? And that's really a lot of things that I'm trying to find out and deliver to the people who are listening on this audience also. And so I think not so much of what I hoped I could have learned more of, but more of like what are some of the things that I feel like Singapore needs that I can help share with folks in this audience. I think part of the main message here that we need back in Singapore are people with this, like I would say, 3 attributes. I think we need people with a strong work ethic. Like we need to bring back that strong work ethic from wherever you are, that has made you successful, have brought you there in the first place. And we need that great expertise. We need expertise here. Like, I mean, people say that all the time. That's the whole reason for this tech forum, right? We need expertise in Singapore and bring that back, right? Bring that solid skills back, right? Like pun intended, right? But and so the third thing and the most important thing, I think, is a strong sense of humility and helpfulness. I think we need people who are both, expert at their work and also have a very strong sense of humility to help, get people to work with them well, right? And people enjoy working with them, right? I think people need to be careful about overvaluing their existing achievements. Oh, yeah, I've worked in the US and you all should listen to me. That's not going to work very well, and it might work against you here in Singapore and make you less effective. I think the last part, actually, I wanted to spend some time to acknowledge the other people that in Singapore, like Gregor and Elaine here, that I've met so many people that have come to Singapore to, excited about this nascent ecosystem and help to grow it. And not just Elaine and Gregor, there are more people out there that, risk their careers and move to Singapore and say, oh, I want to make an impact in Singapore because Singapore is so small, they're so new, right? I can make a big impact here and I can justify that. And so, and at the same time, a lot of good local folks here, podcasts, conferences, meetups, people here are actually doing very well, trying to, drum up the ecosystem here. And so I think there's a saying here that one swallow doesn't make a summer. And I think we need more people to come back in droves. And the tipping point is somewhere, I don't know. But I think that's an especially poignant quote here. And yeah, and I look forward to connecting with more people on this topic as well. Yeah.
Awesome. I love that. JX, what about you?
I was chatting with Jenny Lee of GGV, and she said something that really resonated with what Heng just mentioned, and really applies to Elaine and Gregor, which is she said that one of the most important things is having an immigrant mentality. So for example, for her, when she left Singapore and she moved to China in the year 2000 and started GGV, that's the same thing that makes Silicon Valley great, and that's the same thing that makes Singapore eventually great too. It's when all of us come here and we don't just come here and thinking that, oh, we'll bring our experiences and take high salaries, etc. But it's really bringing the immigrant mentality. And what is that immigrant mentality, right? It's just, getting stuff done and coming here, really wanting to innovate, really putting in the hours, really wanting to grow. And because as an immigrant, you're starting off from nothing. And so I just wanted to touch on that and acknowledge that. Before I go on to the wisdom piece, I just want to touch on what Gregor mentioned just now. We totally agree that software engineers will rule the world, etc. And as a software engineer, I think you're in a really, really good position. The one nuance I want to make here, though, is that in a region like ASEAN and in a place like Singapore, we might be mistaken if we only focus on really good and solid technical skills. Because one thing to keep in mind is that in a nascent industry, we are more tech-enabled than deep tech. And what does tech-enabled mean? If I were to build Grab or Gojek, it's not about having the best matching algorithms or prices. Or say take even TikTok. What makes TikTok great is, yes, they have really good algorithms, but what's behind the scenes in making a great tech-enabled company is all of the operations, business thinking, relationships that move it forward. And it's not something that we can choose to like or dislike. It's just the nature of the region and the industry. And I think that the sooner we recognize that, the more helpful it is for us, because so many times we come in trying to think that I can build the best software experience or the best app. And it's true. But I think what makes you a truly, truly great company is not just that software experience, but that whole other things that comes with that. And so when we talk about that wisdom piece and whatever, I would say that the very important thing is that it's not one-dimensional, right? In that we have to always think about I am in fintech. And when I work with the regulators, with the banks, they are convinced that I have the best software platform already. I don't need to do anything more. They just have to use it. But their concerns are far greater than that, right? There's so many things about customer service, stability, how do you explain it, etc. And so the last part that I want to touch on is that I would say that for someone in our shoes, someone thinking about Singapore, someone thinking of what I wish I knew 5 years ago, is I would say that I would explore the opportunities, pick something, and then just focus on that. And here's what I mean. In Singapore, you have two options. One is that you join a big company, get all the benefits, and then, basically, learn all the fundamentals and get trained. The second is you join a startup, you have none of that, but what you have is breadth, right? You may not have a very good mentor, you may not get very deep into the tech stack because you're not building a system for 100 or a billion people, But I think that the biggest mistake you can make is being in one, choosing one, and you keep thinking about the other. Like you're in a startup and then you keep thinking, oh man, I should have joined a big company. Or you're in a big company and like, man, what the hell am I doing building this one single thing? I want to be experiencing Indonesia. So focus on one, pick one, commit, spend 1 or 2 years, and then reevaluate.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing those insights, both of you. So we're going to move on to the Q&A section now. So there's, I see a couple of themes around cultural differences, networking in Singapore, and tools. So starting off with cultural differences, we have one upvoted question here from Shannon. So having worked overseas and in Singapore, what do you think are main differences in terms of human capital and working culture? So I believe human capital could be referring to recruiting, hiring, onboarding new folks. Gregor or Heng, do you guys want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I have a view. I have a famous slogan, and that is always be careful. The company logo is on the outside of the building, right? It's I always remind people what it looks like on the inside can vary a lot. And the reason I tell people that is because I think your experience related, I'm looking here, right, is like sort of the human capital. So much depends on your immediate manager and the immediate ecosystem, no matter which country you're in, nor what the logo on the outside of the building says, right? You can have so I worked for Govtech, right? Like public sector, and some people say like, oh my God, public sector, like, boring, slow, age-old, legacy, whatever, must be just like the most boring thing in the world, right? And of course, it was totally different, right? We do like really exciting stuff, and that has to do with the leadership we have, right? And I worked at some companies that would be on, the high on the list of the best employers, and I had some very miserable experiences, I say. So in the end, it is really, I think, like the way you feel treated as a person, so much hinges on your manager. And people like to downplay that a little bit and say, oh, we're like peer-based and open. And I actually had that discussion with HR one. It's like, well, then don't give me a manager. Just let me be myself. Then I don't need one. If all this is not true, right, why should somebody determine my career then, right, or my race, right? So in the end, I think, and of course, that didn't go so well at the time, and I don't work there anymore. But I'm just like, okay, you need to be aware that your immediate ecosystem, I think, shapes a very large part of your experience. And the only advice I have there is not be fooled by the brand name or anything. If that doesn't work for you, life is way too short. Just pull the trigger, go somewhere else. And finding a best manager is sometimes worth more than finding the right company, because that's where you learn, that's you will get inspired, that's where you will get motivated. And likewise, if you have a good manager, stay there, I would say, right? That's an amazing asset to have.
Absolutely. There's this saying where people don't leave companies, they leave managers. So I think you hit the
correct.
They
join the brand name, they get lured by the logo, right? And then they do leave the manager. And it's happened to me, right? And I think it's happened to many, many other folks. So that's what I say, cherish a good ecosystem, immediate ecosystem of peers, including the manager. And if you have that, be very happy with that.
Yeah, awesome. So we have another question from Mausen in Singapore. How would the traditionally deferential workplace culture in Singapore affect innovation and creativity? Do you see such deferential attitudes becoming an entrenched attitude in 5 to 10 years in the future?
I mean, I can jump again, and I think it's what Jakes and the other folks said. It's like there's so much movement here in the culture, and I think that is Singapore's strength, if any, right? To absorb and learn and post-process and make sort of its own version of what has come in, like the immigrant attitude and culture, that I would be very careful to project anything 5 to 10 years out, right? I think we're learning, we're adjusting quickly. There are cultural differences, but I don't think any of these are somehow terminal, right? It's not like they're unsurmountable. And one thing that I learned is like when you have experience in different countries, there is never one country is better than another country on all dimensions or even many dimensions, right? You mentioned the culture map. It hints a little bit at this, right? Each country has their respective strengths and weaknesses. And I think the country who's best at sort of reaching some balance there is in the end in the best position. And I always feel that Singapore has a relatively short learning and feedback cycle there. So I'm hopeful that we will do better than anybody else. But I think projecting whether this is going to hinder us in 5 years, I wouldn't think about it this way at all.
I think one of the things I would like to add to that is like really things are changing very quickly. Like Gregor said, I think there's more articles coming out. There's more reading material. People are getting more connected. There's just more MNCs in Singapore. People are just getting more exposed to the good practices, or like, you know, what would be the good practices in Singapore. And so people are going to expect more out of them, the next company that they join, and things are just going to keep moving and pushing forward. And we are in the process of like growing pains right now as we, you know, grow up across the next 5 years. So I would say that the trend is in the right direction, and I think we'll be in good shape in like 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing I would like, and really quickly, one thing I would like that I notice is we don't have as many thought leaders in our field in Southeast Asia. If you look at the people, right, about who defines software engineering, whether this is Martin Fowler or Ken Beck or Dave Farley or Wood Cunningham, or yeah, I'm an author as well, so I know all these guys personally. None of them are in Asia, right? And I think that is probably something we should fix and try to fix, to bring more like, and it's not just about the figurehead, the marketing value, but they pull a whole ecosystem. They're amazing mentors. They bring a dynamic. So I would like to see more of those folks in this region.
Yeah, I think it's about representation, right? Like, I think one of the things Evan Yo that wrote Vue.js, like, you know, going big in Taiwan, China, right? Like, that's representation that we do need in Singapore. We don't have them. I don't know how to get them, but I think it will be very good if we have them. Yeah.
Awesome. So another question that we have from Eleonora. A lot of tech companies in the Bay Area have positions like chief of staff or chief of people that takes charge in ensuring a good company workplace culture. For example, making the workplace a safe space for people of different race, sexual orientation, and culture, etc. So is there something similar that you guys have seen in Singapore?
Just great. I think that's fairly universal, right? Like generally, I mean, everybody wants a diverse and balanced workplace. So whether this rolls up into HR or Govtech, we have like chief people officer. But I don't see a big difference there.
I think
which is
one
good.
of the I think one of the things that Singapore has going for it is the culture of inclusion, and you know, people generally respect other people that are quite different from them, and so most of the time this is not a problem. Although I have heard of instances that there might be a problem, but my personal experience is that I have not experienced some of these, and I cannot really comment on those. But definitely heard one or two instances of, like, you know, inclusivity problems kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that Karen asked PM sort of doing the kickoff the question about the LGBTQ, etc. And my experience is, I mean, look at us, right? We have like 4 national languages, we have 4 national religions, our holidays are spread out, 2 per religion. It's like the diversity we have is hard to match. The difference, I think, for us, it's more a bit of, I would say, sort of quiet tolerance. It's just assumed that people are different and you do your thing. We don't have so much, like, we don't have a pride parade and stuff. We are not so overt about it, but I think deep down, like, it's an extremely tolerant and extremely diverse culture. So that might give people sort of the idea that we're missing something, but I think we're totally not. We're actually super diverse and super tolerant.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not just designating like one position, you know, chief of staff or chief of people or chief of culture to, you know, managing and maintaining culture, but it's also about, you know, what we alluded to earlier around empowering these engineers, empowering individual contributors to also maintain and carry on culture too. So I think that's super important. So we're out of time, but I'll just spend a few seconds to wrap up. So at Facebook, we have the saying, the journey is 1% done. And our journey together to build the tech community here in Singapore is just beginning. So hopefully to the audience, this panel today gives you guys insights into the good and bad of work culture here. And as our panelists mentioned, we all play a role in building and maintaining good engineering culture. And as the Singapore tech community matures and grows over the next few years, it also means engineers will be empowered to solve both technical and product-related problems and influence those decisions too. So when you're considering moving here, think about how you can contribute as a leader and what you can learn here. And everyone has something to learn and also to contribute. So I would recommend to come with an open mind. So hope you found this discussion as insightful as I did. And thank you so much to our panelists, JX, Heng Hong, and Gregor for joining me on this chat.
Thanks for having us. Thank you.